Rain poured down on Chicago as if the sky were desperate to rid itself of its burdens. The asphalt streets glistened under the weight of water, golden streetlights casting blurred reflections that shimmered across the slick pavement like shattered glass. Stephanie Clark's battered Honda Civic struggled against the gusts, slamming into the windshield. She gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her heartbeat raced not only from the rumble of thunder, but because the silver-gray car had been tailing her for blocks. It was the all-too-familiar BMW. Derek, the man she once foolishly believed was the only love of her life, was right behind her. 3 days ago, Stephanie had ended it. After enduring countless bruising grips on her wrist and the icy threats whispered in the dark, she knew if she didn't leave, she would lose herself forever. But Derek refused to let go. To him, she was property, a breathing doll. And men like him never let their possessions slip away. The storm thickened wipers scraping frantically back and forth like a clock counting down to disaster. Stephanie bit her lip, forcing herself to stay calm. "Please, not now," she whispered to the engine, groaning beneath her foot. The BMW stayed locked on her headlights, glaring like a predator's eyes. Through the glass, she could make out Derek's silhouette, his smirk sharp and sure, as though victory was already his. Stephanie swerved suddenly onto Wacker Drive, hoping the riverside slopes would help her shake him. But her chest tightened at the sight ahead, the light turned red. Stop Derek would have her. He would drag her out, and every effort to escape would collapse. Keep going. She might die. In that split-second, reason abandoned her. Stephanie pressed the accelerator and shot through the intersection, ignoring the blaring horns of oncoming cars. And then, crash! The impact slammed her body against the seat, the airbag bursting open. Acrid smoke and scorched metal filled her lungs. Her blood felt frozen. When the car door finally creaked open, icy rain lashed her face as she stumbled out, legs trembling. In front of her stood a sleek black SUV, barely dented, despite her Civic's desperate hit. Its headlights cut through the storm like blades against the night. 3 doors swung open at once. The first man was tall and lean, with cold eyes scanning the scene. One hand was brushing the hidden weight beneath his jacket, undoubtedly a gun. The second was broad and imposing muscles bulging beneath his suit, a wall of flesh and threat. And then the third stepped out from the driver's seat. Through the torrent, he moved with unhurried steps as if the entire city bent to his presence. A charcoal gray suit clung to his towering frame, each stride radiating silent authority. The rain seemed to bend around him, reluctant to touch. His face was carved in sharp, commanding lines, but his eyes stole her breath. Fathomless dark as Lake Michigan in a storm, dangerous yet magnetic. Demanding, she looked closer. The man stopped before her. His voice rolled out deep and resonant, slicing through the rain. "You just caused an accident worth more than $50,000. Stephanie's mouth fell open, her throat dry. I'm sorry, I didn't mean..." He leaned down slightly, eyes locking her lips, curving into a half-smile she couldn't decipher. "Sorry isn't enough. Now you owe me something far more valuable than money." Her breath hitched. What is it?" Straightening, he adjusted his suit, eyes glinting with steel. "Your life. From this moment on, you belong to me." Before Stephanie could react, the roar of a familiar engine tore through the rain. The BMW skidded to a stop, water spraying. Derek leapt out, shouting, "Stephanie, get away from him!" The air froze. The man before her didn't turn his head, just flicked his gaze sideways. Instantly, the 2 suited men moved forward, blocking Derek's path. In that instant, Stephanie understood she had fallen into a dangerous game. On one side was Derek, the twisted man who had tormented her. On the other was a stranger powerful, terrifying. Yet his gaze didn't reduce her to an object. For the first time, she felt like more than a toy. The storm raged on, but her heart burned. What began as a night of running had become the turning point of her entire life. She didn't know if she had escaped one predator, only to walk straight into the lair of a wolf far more ruthless. The rainy night in Chicago was only the beginning. Stephanie had just lost her freedom and found an unexpected fate. Would she remain a pawn in a ruthless power game, or the only woman capable of breaking through the icy heart of Kevin Thompson? Stay with this story, because what lies ahead is even more dangerous and far more romantic. The Chicago rain still fell heavily, as if it wanted to wash the city off the map. But inside Stephanie Clark's mind, all sound had collapsed into a suffocating silence. She stood on a knife's edge between two worlds, in on one side Derek, the man who had once been her lover, but had become a sick, relentless shadow. On the other, the powerful stranger who had just claimed her life as his own. The streetlight cast its dim glow through the rain, painting the man's sharp features in streaks of gold. His eyes held hers deep and weighty, as if they could cage her thoughts. "Come!" His voice was low, decisive, a command that allowed no room for defiance. Two bodyguards immediately stepped forward, black umbrellas unfurling, pressing Stephanie toward the SUV. No. Derek's roar ripped through the rain as he lunged like a madman. "She's mine." The words "she's mine" struck Stephanie like ice. No, she had never belonged to anyone. But before she could react, Derek was seized. The tall, lean bodyguard twisted his arm, driving him onto the wet pavement. The crack of bone mixed with Derek's strangled cry. The man in the suit merely glanced at the scene. He didn't speak. His power radiated from silence, a silence that even Derek couldn't break. Shaking, Stephanie felt herself being ushered up the SUV's steps. The heavy door closed behind her, cutting off the storm and leaving her in an eerie hush. Inside dark brown leather, a faint scent of sandalwood and soft golden lights. Everything was luxurious, oppressive. It felt like stepping into another world, built to impose power and control. He sat across from her. His suit was immaculate, his hair untouched despite the storm outside. His gaze traced every breath she took, every heartbeat. I have to go home," Stephanie stammered, trying to reclaim her voice. "I can't stay here." He leaned back, fingers interlaced. "Home?" The single word cut like a blade back to the tiny apartment on Roosevelt Street where Derek can find you in minutes. Or the cramped clinic office where he's already waited for you more than once. Stephanie froze. The way he spoke, he knew every detail of her life. Who are you?" she gasped, hands twisting together. He smiled faintly but didn't answer right away. His dark eyes locked on her like a chess player who'd already planned every move. "I'm the man who just saved you from Derek," he said, at last. His voice low, yet there was a strange dissonant note hidden beneath the coldness. "And the man to whom you now owe a debt." Stephanie's heart lurched. She remembered his words in the rain. "You belong to me, a debt I never borrowed anything from you. You borrowed your life." His interruption was calm, like stating an undeniable truth. "That crash didn't just destroy your old Civic. It bound your life to mine." The SUV rolled forward, leaving the wet streets behind. Stephanie saw Derek struggling in the rain through the window, his eyes wild with rage and despair. But the sight brought her no relief, only a more profound unease. The road to the outskirts opened wide. Chicago's skyscrapers receded, replaced by the dim glow of lamps lining Lake Michigan's shore. The black water rippled, catching shards of light. The SUV turned down a private lane, trees arching overhead. A towering iron gate appeared ornate with curling designs, guarded on both sides by silent sentries. Slowly, the gate opened like the entrance to a fortress. Stephanie held her breath as the car advanced. The mansion emerged a white stone estate with a high roof and expansive windows glowing warm gold. Rose gardens stretched in perfect symmetry, each bloom shining like a candle in the dark. The door opened. The man stepped out first, then circled back, hand extended. Stephanie Clark. Her name slid off his tongue as if he had known it forever. "Welcome to my world." She hesitated. His eyes didn't leave hers. Part promise, part chain. Trembling, she placed her hand in his, letting that cold warmth guide her into the grand hall. Inside the mansion overwhelmed her. Polished marble floors, a crystal chandelier scattering hundreds of stars. Masterpieces hanging on the walls, every piece of furniture steeped in old-world luxury. This is your home," she whispered. "One of them," he replied as casually as if speaking of toys. "But tonight it's yours." Stephanie clenched her hands, its weight closing in. I don't want to be here. I want my freedom. He stopped, turning fully to face her. His voice dropped each word, deliberate. Freedom, Derek took that from you long ago. Here at least you're safe, but... And I... His head tilted slightly, a half smile flickering across his lips. It will decide when you're truly free. At that moment, Stephanie felt like she'd stepped into a gilded cage, lavish, dazzling, and without a key. That night, she was led to a room on the second floor. The space was so vast that her footsteps echoed. The window overlooked Lake Michigan, shrouded in mist, a bed draped in white silk sheets. A wardrobe already stocked with dresses in her exact size. She froze. Who had prepared all this? How did it fit her so perfectly? A shiver raced down her spine. You know everything about me, don't you? She whispered, trembling. He leaned against the doorframe, the light stretching his shadow long across the floor. I care only about what's mine, he said softly. And now you're among that. Stephanie stepped back, heart pounding. His words were both a sentence and a prophecy. The man's name remained unspoken, yet his power and control wrapped around her like darkness. When he left, the door closed, leaving Stephanie alone in the lavish room. She sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching her chest. In her mind, his voice echoed clear and final, like an unbreakable seal. From now on, you belong to me. Outside, the waves of Lake Michigan lapped gently at the shore. But to Stephanie, it sounded like the rattle of invisible chains, announcing a journey she didn't know she could escape, or one that would consume her forever. Dawn broke over Lake Michigan, its pale silver glow spilling through the expansive glass windows, washing into the lavish room where Stephanie Clark had spent a sleepless night. She sat motionless by the window, hugging a pillow tightly to her chest, eyes fixed on the rippling water below. The room was so silent she could hear her own heartbeat. Part of her wanted to believe it had all been a nightmare, the crash, the stranger's tyrannical claim over her life, Derek being subdued outside. But the soft light glinting across silk curtains and expensive furnishings made one thing brutally clear. This was reality. A soft knock sounded at the door. Stephanie flinched. A middle-aged woman in a black uniform entered, calm yet authoritative. Miss Clark, Mr. Thompson invites you to breakfast. Stephanie's brows furrowed. Thompson. So that was his name? Kevin Thompson. The name echoed in her head like a church bell on a cold morning. She hesitated, then stood. Hiding would only make her weaker. The dining hall was large enough for a banquet, but only 2 places were set on the long, white-clothed table. At the head sat Kevin reading a newspaper, like nothing had happened the night before. His dark suit had been replaced with a plain white shirt, sleeves rolled up, veins visible on his tanned forearms. When Stephanie entered, his eyes lifted from the paper, settling on her weary face. Did you sleep well? His tone was softer than the night before, yet still carried the weight of stone. Stephanie drew a breath and took the seat opposite. You know I couldn't, she answered quietly, eyes steady. I'm being held here like a prisoner. A faint smile tugged at Kevin's lips. Prisoners don't usually get fresh croissants and premium coffee. He tilted his head, pouring the dark liquid into the porcelain cup before her. I call it protection. Stephanie's fingers tightened around the rim. The aroma of coffee rose warm and rich, but the bitterness inside her was sharper still. She said, You know everything about me, her gaze fixed on the tablecloth. My apartment, my work. Derek. Why? Kevin leaned back, tapping a slow rhythm on the arm of his chair. I make it my business to know anything or anyone that could interfere with my operations. Derek Morrison isn't just your ex. He's in debt, and he thought he could use you as a bargaining chip. The words struck like an unseen blow. Stephanie's grip on the cup trembled with anger and humiliation. I am not merchandise. Her voice quivered, yet her eyes burned with defiance. Kevin studied her for a long moment, then inclined his head. I know, but in this world, Stephanie, one's value isn't always theirs to decide. A heavy silence fell. Outside, the morning sun grew brighter, spilling gold into the room, but the air remained thick with shadow between them. After breakfast, Kevin led her down a marble-floored corridor. Classical paintings adorned the walls, and Roman statues stood in alcoves. The grandeur was suffocating. But what unnerved Stephanie more were the discreet cameras hidden in corners, following every step she took. "What do you plan to do with me?" she asked, her voice low, betraying a faint tremor. Kevin stopped before a large glass door opening onto a balcony overlooking the lake. He turned, eyes heavy as iron. "First, I intend to keep you safe. Derek won't stop easily. He's meddled where he shouldn't, and I won't allow him a second chance." His voice dropped. "Not with you. Why do you care? I'm just an ordinary woman." Kevin's gaze locked onto hers, searching through the fractures of her soul. "There are things you don't know," he said softly. "Derek owes more than money. He owes loyalty. And the man he promised you to is my enemy." Stephanie froze. His words cracked open a darkness she had never imagined. "You mean, if I hadn't crashed into your car last night?" Her voice broke. "You would already belong to someone else," Kevin said firmly. "And trust me, you would not have survived to walk away." A shiver swept through her. She turned to the shimmering lake below her shoulders, trembling. Kevin stepped closer. He didn't touch her, only stood near enough for his breath to stir her damp hair. "I don't ask for gratitude," he murmured, "but never believe I'm the only villain." Stephanie turned back, meeting his gaze, an abyss, and a fire all at once. Her pulse raced inexplicably wild. That afternoon, she was allowed into the rose garden behind the mansion. The air was fragrant with damp earth and blooming petals, each rose glowing like a quiet flame. Though storms still churned in her chest, she strolled down the stone path. A figure appeared near the fountain. Not Kevin, but a younger man in a black suit. As she drew closer, he bowed. "I'm Aaron, Mr. Thompson's security aide," he said, his voice gentle, so unlike the harshness of the others. "If you need anything, you can come to me." Stephanie blinked, surprised. A faint smile ghosted across Aaron's lips, though his eyes held cautious watchfulness. "Don't be afraid. Not everyone in this house is your enemy." His words loosened something inside her. She felt the fragile thread of human connection for the first time since arriving. But as she turned, Aaron's eyes flicked upward toward the balcony on the second floor, where Kevin stood with hands in his pockets, silently observing everything. Night fell. Far in the distance, Chicago's skyline glittered, its lights reflected across the water. Stephanie stood at the window, wondering if her life had been pulled into a story she could never escape. Her fingers touched the cold glass eyes closing. In that instant, she realized that Kevin Thompson was not only her captor. In his gaze lived something else, a secret, an obsession, or perhaps a choice she was not yet ready to name. Night at the Thompson estate was unnervingly still. Outside Lake Michigan lay under a veil of mist, strings of golden lights stretching along the shore like strokes on a painted canvas. Yet inside Stephanie Clark, that picture held only a cold hue, no warmth strong enough to steady her. Since their conversation that morning, Kevin's words had been spinning in her head. "If you hadn't crashed into my car today, you would belong to someone else." The sentence felt like a cruel truth, and a warning her fate had been decided long before she knew it. Stephanie left her room craving air. The grand staircase descended into a silent hall, crystal light from the chandelier, scattering like 1,000 tiny shards. "Miss Clark." The deep male voice came from the corridor. She startled, turning. Kevin stood there leaning lightly against the dark wooden frame, a glass of red wine swirling in his hand. The top 2 buttons of his shirt were undone, his collar open, revealing sun-browned skin, at once careless and magnetic. "I just wanted a walk," Stephanie said softly, suddenly unsettled by his gaze. Kevin arched a brow, stepping closer. "This is my house. You may go anywhere." "But..." He sipped his wine. "Don't forget, this place has its own rules." "Rules?" Stephanie frowned. "Only what's necessary to keep you safe." He stopped a single pace away, his dark eyes locking onto hers, making her heart skip. "And you, Stephanie, are becoming the center of dangers you don't yet see." She couldn't speak. In that moment, his phone rang. Kevin glanced at the screen, a flicker of cold steel passing over his face. He turned away, his voice a low command. "Do not leave the estate tonight." Stephanie returned to her room, but the unease wouldn't fade. She opened the window, letting the lake's damp wind brush her face. Then a strange flash flickered in the garden below, brief but enough to trigger an alarm. She yanked the curtains shut, heart hammering. Someone was watching. Before she could process, a loud crash echoed from downstairs. Metal clanged, followed by a muffled shout. Stephanie froze. The garden light snapped on, an alarm shrieking through the night. The door burst open. Aaron, the security aide, stood there, his face grave. "Come with me. What's happening?" Stephanie gasped. "No time to explain. Morrison's men or someone else are here." Aaron seized her arm, pulling her down a narrow corridor toward the basement. Gunfire cracked in the distance, splintering the illusion that she was a protected guest. As they neared the safe room, rapid footsteps thundered ahead. Both of them stopped. A figure emerged from the end of the hall. Kevin. He wore a black leather jacket, a pistol in hand, eyes cold as ice. Yet when he saw Stephanie, that coldness softened, replaced by fierce focus. "Get her to the basement," Kevin ordered Aaron. "And you, sir, I'll hold them off at the east entrance." He paused, glancing at Stephanie. "Don't be afraid." The words were brief, but she caught a promise buried deep in his eyes. She wanted to say more, but Kevin had already turned, his tall frame vanishing into smoke and flashing lights. The basement was vast, its concrete walls thick. Aaron shut the steel door, entering a code. The air was close, yet gunfire still echoed faintly from above. Stephanie wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay calm. "Who are they?" she whispered. Aaron exhaled. Possibly Morrison's men, or someone else, someone behind him. Stephanie remembered Kevin's warning, "Derek owes more than money." A chill ran down her spine. "Will Kevin be all right?" Aaron glanced at her as if reading something unspoken. He didn't answer directly. "Mr. Thompson has never lost a battle." Time in the safe room crawled. Stephanie sat still, but each minute felt like an hour. In her mind, Kevin's image replayed the gun in his hand, his steady stance in the smoke. The shots grew sporadic, then stopped. Silence pressed in until she could hear her own breath, ragged and quick. A knock sounded on the door, 3 sharp raps. Aaron drew his weapon, then opened it. Light spilled from the hall. Kevin stood there, his coat streaked with blood, hair tousled, but his eyes unwavering. Stephanie shot to her feet, her heart surging. Are you hurt?" Kevin set the gun on the metal table, his voice hoarse but steady. "Just a scratch. But they've learned too much." She stared at the dark stain on his shoulder, a knot rising in her throat. Words caught and died. Kevin met her gaze, pausing. A tired yet strangely warm smile touched his lips. "You care about me, Stephanie?" The question slid past her defenses like a blade. Flustered, she began to turn away, but his eyes held her. I think... If you fall, this whole place collapses," she murmured. Kevin stepped closer, only a few handspans between them. The scent of gunpowder mixed with the faint trace of wine on his clothes. "I won't fall so easily," he said quietly. "I haven't yet permitted myself to abandon what's mine." Stephanie's breath caught. For the first time, she saw not only control in his dark eyes, but a fire that made her want to run and stay at once. That night, after the mansion calmed, Stephanie couldn't sleep. She stood at her second-floor window, staring at the rose garden below its soil, still marked by boots from the firefight. Across the way, light spilled from another room. She saw Kevin's silhouette through the glass, removing the bandage from his shoulder, his movements decisive, silent, unflinching. A pang of something unfamiliar swelled in her chest. The man who wore steel on the outside bled like anyone else. The only difference, he chose to hide it behind a perfect mask. Stephanie closed her eyes. For the first time since entering the estate, she felt she was no longer merely a captive. She had become a witness to Kevin Thompson's hidden vulnerability, a part of him perhaps no one had ever seen. And in that moment, the invisible thread between them tightened, binding her further to a fate she was no longer sure she had the strength to escape. The morning after the attack, the Thompson estate felt altered. Tension seeped into every marble corridor, as if even the walls held their breath. Servants and guards moved swiftly yet quietly, their eyes shadowed with seriousness. Stephanie Clark stepped out of her room, her shoulders trembling faintly. She hadn't slept at all. Images of Kevin, his wounded shoulder, his eyes unwavering yet silent, haunted her through the night. She met Aaron at the end of the hallway. He inclined his head, his voice lowered. "Mr. Thompson is waiting for you in the library." "The library?" Stephanie's brows lifted. She had never been inside. The dark wooden doors revealed a vast chamber with a soaring ceiling shelves stretching toward the arched roof. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, spilling over rows of old leather-bound books, making the place feel like a cathedral of knowledge. Kevin sat at a long table in the center with a black coffee. His shoulder was neatly bandaged, his face betraying no fatigue. When he saw her, his lips curved faintly, half greeting, half tease. "You came. I was wondering if you'd want to see me after last night." Stephanie hesitated. "I want to understand what's happening." Kevin closed the notebook before him, his dark eyes drilling into hers. "Are you sure? Because once you know, there's no going back." Stephanie clenched her hands tightly. "I hate being turned into a pawn without knowing the game being played." The corner of his mouth twitched into the briefest smile. "Good. Then let me show you." He rose, striding to the far shelves. He pulled on an old book. A hidden door creaked open. Stephanie's heart pounded. She hesitated, then followed. Beyond was a narrow stairwell descending into another basement. The room opened into cold steel metal cabinets. Maps spread across a table, surveillance screens flashing images of Chicago's streets. "This is," Stephanie whispered, "my command center." Kevin cut in evenly. "I'm not just a businessman. I play in games the press will never mention." He pointed at the map where several red circles were drawn. "Derek Morrison is just a pawn. Behind him is a name you wouldn't expect, Alexander Delgado." Stephanie froze. She had heard the name whispered before, a shadowy kingpin in Miami, infamous for cruelty and power in the underworld of finance. Kevin continued, "Delgado wants what I have, my power, my network, and," his eyes flicked to her, "any weakness he can exploit to bring me down." Goosebumps raced across her skin. "You mean, you are the card he wants." Kevin finished. Derek was only following orders. The room grew silent. Stephanie's heart thundered, unsure whether from fear or from realizing this truth bound her to Kevin tighter than ever. "Why tell me this?" she whispered. "You could have hidden it. I can't escape anyway." Kevin's mouth curved slightly, his eyes glinting with something unreadable. "Because I need you to understand. If not, you'll hate me forever." Stephanie froze. The words were unlike him, less command, more confession. For an instant, she glimpsed a crack in his steel facade. Back in the grand hall, Stephanie wandered into the rose garden. Morning sunlight glimmered across each bloom, scattering brilliance, yet she was tangled in chaos. Aaron appeared suddenly carrying a cup of tea. He set it gently on the stone bench beside her. "Are you all right? I don't know," Stephanie admitted. "I've been dragged into a war that isn't mine." Aaron was silent for a long moment, then said quietly, "You should be careful. Not everyone in this house is trustworthy." She lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes, serious, contemplative, so different from his usual calm. "What do you mean?" Aaron didn't answer directly. He bowed his head slightly. "Just remember, sometimes the traitor stands very close." The words cut through her like a cold blade. When she returned to her room that evening, a small note was tucked beneath her pillow. The handwriting was hurried, forceful. "Don't trust anyone, not even the one you think you're beginning to trust." Stephanie's hands trembled as she held the slip of paper. She looked around. The room was quiet, the window still locked, the door untouched. Who had left it, Aaron? A servant? Or had her enemies already slipped inside? She clenched the note in her fist, her heart in turmoil. Was Kevin truly her protector, or the chain that bound her tighter? Was Aaron sincere or planting doubt in her mind? And Derek, had he disappeared, or was he waiting in the shadows to drag her back into the dark that night, gazing out at the moonlit lake? Stephanie knew one thing: the first cracks had appeared. Cracks in Kevin's cold armor. And cracks within herself, between fierce suspicion and a strange emotion she still didn't dare to name. Night fell over Chicago. Golden lights shimmering across restless waves along the river. Inside the vast room of the Thompson estate, Stephanie sat by the window, absent-mindedly turning a thin silver ring on her finger, the only keepsake she still had from her mother. Outside, the wind rattled the glass, mingling with the sound of insects thickening the night's silence. She hadn't dared to sleep. The anonymous note she had found beneath her pillow haunted her, each word etched into her mind like a scar. Don't trust anyone, not even the one you think you're beginning to trust. The door creaked open. Kevin entered, his white shirt slightly undone, a bandage still wrapped around his wrist. He looked tired, yet his eyes burned with a fire she could not name. You're still awake. His voice was low, hoarse, echoing in the quiet. Stephanie turned quickly, sliding the note into a book on the table. I couldn't sleep, she whispered. Kevin moved slowly to the window, the city lights casting sharp lines across his chiseled face. I know I've pulled you into a storm, he said, his tone unexpectedly gentle. But I promise I won't let anyone touch you. From anyone else, those words would have sounded empty. But from Kevin. Steady voice, unwavering eyes, they made her heart falter for a beat. Yet the memory of the note surged up instantly, forcing her to keep her distance. Promises, she murmured, are sometimes the most dangerous things. Kevin's brows lifted, his gaze piercing hers, as though demanding answers. But he didn't press. Quietly, he poured her a glass of water, set it on the table, and then turned to the door. Rest early. Tomorrow will be a long day. The door closed, leaving only the faint trace of his cologne and a heavy emptiness behind. The next morning, the mansion was still steeped in tension. Security rotated more frequently, and armored vehicles lined the driveway. Stephanie descended the grand staircase and encountered Aaron. He bowed slightly, his voice calm, but his eyes unreadable. Miss Clark? Mr. Thompson wishes you to accompany him to the company headquarters this morning. Stephanie hesitated. Why must I go? Because the enemy has started circling. It's safer there, he replied curtly, though something in his tone hinted more. The car ride passed in silence. Kevin sat beside her, absorbed in a thick file of documents. Neither spoke. Only the engine's hum and the light rain patter against the windows filled the air. The Thompson Group headquarters loomed ahead, an imposing tower of glass and steel cutting into the gray sky. Inside, the atmosphere was grand, elegant, but cold, so different from the fleeting warmth Kevin sometimes revealed. On the 30th floor, the boardroom was already filled with shareholders. Stephanie sat quietly in a corner, trying to disappear. Yet she could feel their probing eyes. Powerful men, their half-smiles laced with calculation. A man with salt and pepper hair and a gravelly voice spoke. Thompson, rumors are spreading in the press about a special woman by your side. This could damage the West Coast merger. Stephanie stiffened as every eye turned toward her. Cold swept down her spine. But Kevin only leaned back in his chair, a calm smile tugging at his lips. My private life has never been boardroom business. If you care about results, look at the numbers. He tossed the report across the table. Last quarter, we grew 12%. That should silence every rumor. The room fell tense and silent. The stares dispersed. But Stephanie knew she had become the focal point of suspicion. At noon, walking down the long, carpeted corridor, Stephanie overheard a hushed exchange tucked in the shadows. Word of the woman has reached Delgado. He intends to use this weakness to force Thompson's hand. Does Mr. Thompson know? Not yet, and it's best he doesn't know I was the one who leaked it. Stephanie stumbled back, her pulse racing. The whispered conversation cut through her fragile trust like a knife. A traitor was inside Kevin's ranks. But who? By late afternoon, Kevin brought her back to the estate. As the car stopped, he suddenly caught her hand. Stephanie. His voice was warm, stripped of its usual edge. I know what's happening frightens you, but I need you to trust me. His eyes glowed like a smoldering fire, bright, dangerous. Stephanie met his gaze, torn apart inside. I want to believe, she whispered. But are you hiding something from me? Kevin froze for a heartbeat. His grip tightened, his eyes darkening. There are things I cannot tell you, not yet. But the one truth you must remember, anyone who betrays me will never be forgiven. The words struck her as both a vow and a veiled threat. Stephanie turned away, hiding the storm in her chest. But at that moment, she realized that the truth behind it would have been far more terrifying if Kevin had been silent. That night, under the sliver of a crescent moon, Stephanie rose quietly from her bed. She opened the drawer and pulled out the anonymous note. The more she stared at it, the more it seemed like a whisper clawing at her mind. She no longer knew where the real enemy lay. Was it Delgado somewhere beyond these walls? Or the very people sharing this roof with her? A chilling thought flickered. Perhaps the crack in the darkness would not come from outside strangers, but from the person standing closest to Kevin. And if that were true, everything she held on to could collapse in a single night. The evening in Chicago was strangely cold. Strings of golden lights along Michigan Avenue glimmered against towering glass windows, reflecting like 1,000 hidden eyes watching every step. Stephanie sat on the second-floor balcony of the mansion, clutching a thin coat around her shoulders. Below in the garden, shadows of guards moved silently, their footsteps steady as the beat of a tense symphony. Inside her, turmoil churned. The warning note, the suspicious glances from the boardroom, and Kevin's chilling words, "Anyone who betrays me, I will not forgive," echoed endlessly. Trust, it seemed, was being tested more than ever. Footsteps sounded behind her. Kevin appeared holding 2 glasses of red wine, his gaze never leaving her. "You might need something to calm your mind." His voice was low, steady, not a command, not an order. He set a glass on the wooden table. Stephanie lifted it, swirling the dark liquid so the moonlight glinted through. She didn't drink. "Do you ever think that everything you've built will collapse someday?" she asked softly. Kevin was silent momentarily, before lowering himself into the chair across from her. He leaned back, and his eyes revealed a rare fatigue for once. "Every empire has cracks, Stephanie, but only the weak let them swallow them whole. I choose to fight." Stephanie bit her lip, torn between admiration and unease. She searched his eyes, hoping to glimpse a truth hidden deep inside. "But what if the enemy isn't outside?" she pressed, "but already inside this house?" Kevin stilled. His hand tightened around the glass. "What did you hear?" Stephanie shook her head. She didn't mention the hushed conversation she had overheard, nor the anonymous note. Speaking of them now would only spark greater danger. "Just a feeling," she whispered. Kevin's eyes darkened, rippling like storm water under the night. "Your instincts are often sharper than you think, Stephanie." The next day, the Thompson estate received a special guest, Lucas Gray, Kevin's longtime associate. In his 40s, Lucas carried himself with polished ease, silver hair, calm smile. He was the financial brain behind the company's most powerful deals. Stephanie was briefly introduced, then sat quietly in the lounge while the men spoke. Their voices were low, but fragments still reached her ears. "Kevin, I believe Delgado has already placed someone close to you," Lucas murmured. "And that someone isn't a stranger to us." Stephanie's pulse quickened. "Do you have proof?" Kevin asked, his voice quiet but sharp as ice. "Not enough for an accusation. But funds have vanished from several investment pools, rerouted to covert accounts linked to Miami. Only someone close would know the path of that money." A heavy silence blanketed the room. Kevin's fingers tapped the table, his gaze glinting like a blade. "If it's true, I'll deal with it myself." Stephanie sat frozen, her heart trembling. She sank deeper into a ruthless game where anyone could wear a mask. That evening, as Stephanie left the study, she crossed paths with Aaron in the corridor. He leaned casually against the railing, the wall sconce casting sharp light across his stern features. "You shouldn't listen too closely to their conversations," he said, his voice low and rough. "It'll only frighten you." Stephanie met his eyes. "And you? Whose side are you on?" "Aaron?" For a moment his gaze flickered. Then he gave a faint, ironic smile. "I stand on the side of justice. But in this house, justice is often a luxury." His words left her more uncertain than before. In that moment, she realized the depth of her isolation, caught between fragile trust in Kevin and Aaron's cryptic warnings. Late at night, restless, she wandered into the garden. Passing the glass house filled with orchids, she noticed a faint light glowing inside. Curiosity tugged, and she pushed the door open. The air was sweet with orchids, thick with humidity. But what froze her was the silhouette of a man speaking in urgent whispers into a phone. She recognized the voice instantly. "Aaron. I passed along the intel as agreed, but he's starting to suspect. Delgado will have what he wants soon. His tone was hushed tense. Stephanie's blood turned to ice. Her hand gripped the doorway until it shook. The words were undeniable. Aaron, the man who had warned her and seemed to protect her, was the traitor. She turned to slip away, but a twig cracked beneath her shoe. Aaron spun. Their eyes met. In his, she saw shock, then cold steel. You heard everything he said softly, his calm veneer stripped away. Stephanie's heart thundered. She wanted to run, but her legs felt rooted to the damp stone floor. Why? She choked. Aaron took a step forward, his face shadowed. Because Kevin Thompson doesn't deserve it all. Delgado is strong enough to devour this city. And you, Stephanie, you are the key. The words cut like a knife. Stephanie stepped back, fire sparking in her eyes, despite the fear. I won't let him touch me. And I won't let you use me. In that instant, she knew the game had changed. She was no longer merely a pawn. She was holding the secret that could bring everything crashing down. Somewhere in the darkness, the curtain began to tremble, ready to reveal truths no one expected. The night wind from Lake Michigan swept through the window frame, carrying a chill that cut to the bone. Stephanie stood in her room, her heart pounding, her hands still trembling after what she had witnessed in the greenhouse. Aaron's words echoed relentlessly in her head. Delgado will soon have what he wants. And you are the key. She didn't dare sleep. Instead, she sat motionless in a chair, staring into the darkness. Everything around her felt like a trap. The man she once thought an ally was, in truth, a traitor. Yet Kevin was not someone she could fully trust either. She was caught in a maze where every step might send her into the abyss. The next morning, the atmosphere in the mansion was thick with unease. Kevin convened an emergency meeting with his most trusted guards. Stephanie wasn't invited, but standing in the hallway, she could hear the tense voices from the strategy room. Someone leaked my schedule. Kevin's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp. Delgado knows my every move. If we don't uncover the mole, the entire network will collapse. Aaron was present as well. His voice was calm, steady, betraying nothing. I'll monitor the information channels. It could be a lower-level employee who was bribed. Stephanie bit her lip until she tasted blood. He could stand there calm and composed, lying openly before Kevin, and no one suspected a thing. When the meeting ended, Kevin stepped out and found Stephanie by the long window. He studied her for a moment before speaking. Do you have something you want to tell me? Stephanie flinched, quickly turning away. No, I was thinking. About what? He moved closer, his eyes locking into hers. The distance was too close, her breath faltering. She wanted to tell him the truth about Aaron, but fear held her back. If Kevin didn't believe her, would he think she was trying to sow division? I think there are people you shouldn't trust, she finally said, her words vague but heavy. Kevin's brow lifted, suspicion flickering briefly, but he didn't press. Instead, he laid a hand on her shoulder, his voice low. And I hope you're not one of them. The words caught in her throat. She nodded faintly, a strange mix of pain and warmth filling her chest. Kevin took Stephanie to a secret penthouse apartment atop a skyscraper that afternoon. From the balcony, the entire city stretched it beneath them, bathed in golden dusk light. Kevin said, "This is where I go when I need to get away from it all." Opening the door for her, no guards, no cameras, only quiet. Stephanie looked around. The space was ample but simpler than the mansion. Abstract paintings, neatly stacked books, little else. I didn't think you needed a place to hide, she said softly, almost smiling. Everyone needs somewhere to breathe. Even men like me, Kevin, replied, his gaze drifting outward. At that moment, he wasn't the cold billionaire or the ruthless player of power games, just a solitary man carrying burdens that were too heavy. Something inside Stephanie softened. And you? He asked suddenly, turning to her. If you could return to the past, what life would you choose? Stephanie froze. Images of her simple days surfaced, the therapy classes, the small apartment, her modest dreams. I only wanted a peaceful life, she whispered, but I was never given the choice. Kevin said nothing. He only reached out, brushing his fingers lightly over hers. The touch was gentle, reassuring, yet it unsettled her more deeply than anything else. They sat on the balcony, under the stars that night, sharing wine. The city sparkled beneath them, calm on the surface, But Stephanie's mind was a storm of unanswered doubts. Kevin, she murmured, her voice barely carrying on the wind, if one day the person closest to you betrayed you, what would you do? His eyes met hers, glinting with cold fire. I wouldn't let it happen twice. The words sent a chill racing down her spine. They sounded less like an answer, more like a prophecy. When they returned to the mansion the next morning, something felt wrong. A unit of guards had been reassigned, and several cameras were temporarily disabled. Kevin sensed it, but an explosion thundered from the west gate before he could act. Smoke billowed, high screams cutting through the chaos. Stephanie froze in terror as Aaron seized her arm in the commotion. "Come with me," he barked, gripping her tightly. But she understood in the icy edge of his eyes, this wasn't rescue. It was captured. She struggled, her voice breaking. "You're betraying Kevin." "No, Stephanie." Aaron's jaw clenched, his grip unyielding. "I'm choosing the winning side." Through the smoke, she caught a glimpse of Kevin charging forward, fire blazing in his eyes. His voice thundered across the courtyard. "Aaron, let her go." But gunfire erupted. Chaos swallowed everything, and in the choking gray haze, Stephanie realized she had fallen into the storm's very center, where love and betrayal entwined, and every choice demanded a price in blood. The smoke from the explosion still billowed thick across the mansion courtyard. Alarms wailed, footsteps thundered in chaos. Aaron dragged Stephanie through the dark hallway, her heart pounding as if it would burst from her chest. "Let me go!" she screamed, struggling with all her strength. But Aaron's grip only tightened, his hand like steel. In the flickering light, his face no longer carried its usual composure. It was cold, ruthless. "You'll thank me later, Stephanie," he said evenly, though his voice cut like ice. "Thompson can't protect you. Only Delgado has the power to keep you safe." "Safe?" She choked out a bitter laugh. "You call turning me into a bargaining chip safety?" For a brief instant, defiance blazed in her eyes. Aaron hesitated, as though her words touched some sliver of humanity left in him. But the flicker died, swallowed again by shadow. "Don't be naive, Stephanie. In this world, a person's worth is measured only by their usefulness." He pulled her along faster. Outside, Kevin had just broken free of the gunfire and smoke. His shoulder was grazed, blood seeping through his shirt, but his eyes were a storm. He didn't need to speak. His loyal guards formed around him, instantly ready to block any enemy. "Where's Aaron?" Kevin roared. A breathless subordinate answered. He took Miss Clark toward the rear lot. Kevin didn't hesitate. Though gunfire still erupted at the gates, though he knew it was a trap. Only one thought consumed him. Stephanie. Stephanie was shoved into a waiting black SUV. The engine roared, tires screeched. She clawed at the locked doors, desperation rising. Aaron sat beside her, gaze fixed ahead, jaw tight. "Why me?" she whispered, voice trembling but edged with fury. "You could betray Kevin, but why drag me into it?" Aaron turned, his eyes shadowed with conflict. "Because you are his weakness. Delgado only has to touch you, and Thompson will fall." Stephanie shivered. Everything came back to Kevin. Whether she wanted it or not, she was at the very center of this war. Meanwhile, Kevin's Maserati tore down the empty streets, headlights slicing through the night. His hands clenched the wheel knuckles, white eyes burning red. Gunfire crackled in his earpiece. Orders barked over the radio, but none of it mattered. All he saw was the black SUV ahead. "Hold on, Stephanie." He muttered a prayer torn from his chest. The SUV screeched into an abandoned warehouse near the docks. Metal doors slammed shut behind them. Inside, the air reeked of oil and rust. Stephanie was dragged from the car, tied to a chair in the center of the cavernous room. From the shadows, a low laugh rolled out. "Welcome, Miss Clark." Alexander Delgado emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, salt and pepper hair, slicked back eyes sharp as knives. His gray suit did nothing to soften the aura of a predator, long accustomed to blood. Stephanie felt her veins freeze under his gaze. How amusing Delgado circled her slowly like prey in his sights. "An ordinary girl, yet Kevin Thompson trembles for you. I must see for myself what makes you so special." Summoning courage. Stephanie lifted her chin. "If you think I'm his weakness, you're wrong. Delgado chuckled, leaning close, his breath cold against her ear. Then let me test that. Outside, Kevin and his men stormed the building. Gunfire erupted, bullets shrieking through the night. The warehouse doors burst open in a hail of sparks. Kevin strode in through the haze of smoke and fire, his eyes locked only on her. Stephanie. His voice thundered raw with desperation. Her head snapped up, eyes meeting his across the chaos. The world narrowed to a taut thread binding their hearts in that instant. Delgado clapped mockingly. So you've come Kevin Thompson walking into my net for a woman. Blind love makes the best trap. Kevin raised his gun, rage blazing in his stare. Touch her and it'll be the last mistake you ever make. Delgado smirked and flicked his fingers. Aaron stepped forward, raising his gun directly at Stephanie. Put the weapon down, Kevin, or she dies. The air froze. Stephanie's pulse hammered in her ears. She could see the fury in Kevin's eyes, but beneath it an unspoken promise. If I must choose, Kevin's voice was hoarse, unwavering eyes locked on her. I choose you. In that heartbeat, Stephanie understood he would risk everything, even his life, for her. A spark lit in her chest, painful, overwhelming, but undeniable. A gunshot cracked. Aaron staggered, clutching his shoulder, his weapon clattering to the concrete. Kevin lunged forward, slashing the ropes from Stephanie's wrists, pulling her against him. I told you no one touches you, he growled, his voice, ragged eyes fierce with resolve. Delgado snarled, drawing his weapon, but Kevin's men swarmed in. The warehouse exploded with gunfire muzzle flashes carving through the smoke. Kevin shielded Stephanie with his body bullets ricocheting close. She felt small, yet safer than ever in his arms. Kevin? Her voice broke. I'm here. His forehead pressed to hers in the storm of violence. And I'm not leaving. When the smoke thinned, Delgado was gone, vanished into the chaos. Kevin and Stephanie stumbled out into the night, lungs heaving. The icy wind off the docks whipped around them, but Kevin's arms locked around her, unyielding. Behind them stretched the vast, violent city. But here, in this fragile moment, there were only two souls who had just crossed the line between life and death, bound now by something more profound. Stephanie lifted her tear-bright eyes to his. No matter what. Don't leave me, Kevin. He bent, pressing a fierce, tender kiss to her forehead, an invisible vow etched in fire. I swear, Stephanie, from this moment on, there is only one ending. We stand together or fall together. In the smoky dark, that promise rang out, carved forever into their hearts. The Chicago docks were drowned in heavy fog. After the chaos, Kevin brought Stephanie back to the mansion that night. Yet neither of them found sleep. In Kevin's eyes, the rage still burned. In Stephanie's heart, fear and tangled emotions gripped her tightly, refusing to let go. By the tall window, Kevin stood motionless, his white shirt stained with blood he hadn't yet changed. His broad back loomed against the dim light like a fortress wall, unbreakable yet marred with cracks. Delgado won't stop, he muttered, his voice rough as if speaking to himself. Tonight was only the beginning. Stephanie stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm. Kevin, you can't fight all of this alone. He turned toward her. In his eyes lay both tenderness and a deep pain he had never shown before. I've lived my whole life that way, Kevin said with a faint, bitter smile. Alone against the world. But this time... He paused, gripping her hand tightly. This time, I can't let you be pulled into it. Stephanie shook her head, tears glimmering in her eyes. I'm already here. Whether I want it or not, I've become part of this war. You can't deny that. Kevin stared at her for a long moment, then suddenly pulled her into his arms. The embrace no longer carried cold possession, but a shield of raw, unspoken devotion. 3 days later, the mansion was taut with tension. News broke everywhere the Thompson empire faced the takeover threat, its stock in violent turmoil. The press swirled with rumors of a dark shadow over Kevin's financial empire. Delgado unleashed waves of disinformation from Miami, stirring the storm even higher. From her office, Stephanie watched heart heavy. She knew she was the bait Delgado wielded to keep the fire burning. Suddenly, her phone vibrated. An anonymous message appeared. If you want to save Thompson, come to the old docks tonight, alone. Stephanie froze. Her heartbeat thundered. It was clearly a trap, but perhaps the only chance to end this once and for all. That night, she slipped quietly from the mansion, carrying only the silver ring her mother had given her. The old docks were deserted containers, stacked high like looming walls. Dim lamps cast long shadows over the black water. Delgado emerged from the darkness, calm, his smile sharp as a blade. "Brave girl," he said slowly. "I knew you would come." Stephanie held his gaze, though her hand in her pocket trembled. "What do you want from me?" Delgado stepped closer, eyes gleaming with menace. "I want you to stand before Kevin and force him to surrender everything, or lose you forever." Stephanie drew a long breath. In that instant, she realized this was not only a battle between Kevin and Delgado, but her own choice between love and survival. Engines roared. Kevin appeared tall and unyielding through the fog, his eyes like silver blades. He looked straight at Delgado, his voice low and hoarse. "Let her go." Delgado laughed, signaling with his hand. Armed men stepped from the shadows encircling them. "You came quickly, Thompson. But this time you'll kneel." Kevin strode forward without fear. "I've knelt before many things in my life, but never to you." The air thickened heavy as a powder keg waiting for a spark. "Enough," Stephanie cried. Her voice pierced the tension. "If you want my life, let me decide what it's worth." Both men froze. She stepped between them, her eyes shimmering yet resolute. "Kevin." Her voice trembled but grew stronger with each word. "I don't want to be the excuse for a meaningless war. If you see me as your weakness, then from now on, I will be your strength." Kevin stared at her, stunned. In that moment, he saw she was no longer the fragile woman he thought needed protection, but an inseparable part of himself. Delgado scoffed bitterly. "How sweet. But in this world, love is nothing compared to power." He drew his gun and leveled it at Stephanie. In a split second, Kevin lunged, shielding her. The gunshot cracked through the night. A bullet tore into Kevin's shoulder, staining his white shirt with crimson. "No, Kevin." Stephanie screamed, clutching him as he staggered. He gripped her hand tightly, his voice hoarse but unyielding. "I told you, no one touches you." Kevin's guards stormed in gunfire, erupting across the docks. Delgado was wrestled down, though his eyes still burned with madness as he was dragged away. Kevin was rushed back to the mansion, his wound bleeding, but not fatal. Stephanie stayed by his side, holding his cold hand, refusing to let go. "You're not leaving me," she whispered through tears. Kevin opened his eyes, a faint smile curving his lips. "I never intended to." She bent, pressing her lips to his hand, trembling. In that moment, she understood every fear and scar paled beside the love they now shared. Weeks later, the headlines blazed, Delgado extradited to Miami, his empire in ruins. The Thompson Group had survived the storm, its stock rebounding. But for Stephanie, the noise of the world no longer mattered. What mattered was the man before her, the man who had laid down his life to keep her safe. One evening, as sunset bathed Lake Michigan in gold, Stephanie sat on the balcony beside Kevin. His shoulder was still bandaged, but his eyes were softer now, free of their constant edge. "I once thought I would never let anyone step into this world of mine," Kevin said quietly. "But you shattered every rule I had." Stephanie rested her head against his shoulder, smiling through her tears. "And you," Kevin broke down every wall inside me. They sat like that, wrapped in twilight, the city alive in the distance but far away. All that remained were two people who had endured blood and fire, yet found each other in a fate that once seemed cruel. In the end, that crossroads had led them to a love from which there was no turning back. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter of Love, Betrayal, and Redemption. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what you felt about this journey.